Velgrynd follows Ludora's soul past time, space, and whole worlds. Every fragment she finds is another life, another goodbye, and another proof that love can survive even reincarnation. Then one leap drops her into an emperor's bedchamber, a blade at her throat, and a dying world war only she might stop. AI Anime and Manga presents. If Velgrynd's faraway memories pull you in, tap like, comment which Ludora life hit hardest, and subscribe for the next slime part. YouTube members get upcoming episodes early while helping cover the AI narration, subtitles, thumbnails, and rendering that keep this project moving. Before she can save the Emperor called Oharu, Velgrynd has to prove what kind of being just walked into his dying world. The first place Velgrynd set foot in was a rift in faraway space. Exactly where it was she did not know. But she was no longer bound by the ordinary limitations of time, and that gave her a chance to face herself properly. In that faraway place, she finally made the ultimate skill Cthugha, Lord of the Fire God, entirely her own. Cthugha included the ability to trace Ludora's soul. To be exact, it could track the location of any target its master specified. With that power, Velgrynd could discover pieces of her beloved Ludora's soul no matter how far away they were, even beyond time and space. After that, she needed a way to jump toward them. Dimensional Leap provided that. It was the complete union of controlled dimensions and trans-dimensional leap, a feat possible only through the power of an ultimate skill far beyond most others of its kind. Even so, it was not perfect. Dimensional Leap could not calculate exact destination coordinates across dimensions. It could not simply choose any time and place its user desired. When leaping inside the same timeline, that flaw became much less important, and instantaneous travel over any distance was possible. Across other worlds, however, the leap still needed guidance. So Velgrynd let the soul fragments call to her, and she used that call to chase Ludora. The first place she reached was a large landmass on some planet or another, a world where civilization was only just beginning. There she found the leader of a tribe of dark-skinned people, a young blonde man who carried a piece of Ludora's soul inside him. His people had been hunter-gatherers, but over time they had built a permanent home in the basin of a great river. Velgrynd did not hesitate to help them. She conjured rain, tamed the river, and turned the land fertile. Agriculture replaced a life spent solely on the hunt. Food became plentiful. The tribe could feed more mouths, and their settlement became a town feared by the surrounding villages. Blessed lands invite threats. Velgrynd saw that and prepared another gift. She gave them a furnace hardy enough to melt metal, a technology wildly out of place in that era. The young man and his tribe leapt straight from stone tools to bronzeware, then to iron tools and weapons. They swallowed the nearby villages, grew stronger, and eventually became a kingdom. The throne passed to the king's son, and then to his grandson. Velgrynd stopped aiding the kingdom directly. Instead, she stayed close to the person she loved so much, never exercising her skills for the kingdom's sake no matter how often she was asked. That was what her beloved wanted. The first king told her that if he were in her place, he would have made his people owe him far more than they could ever pay back. But he did not need any more than this. If he retired from the throne, he said, such overwhelming power would be far too much for his descendants to handle. Velgrynd accepted that completely. She answered him by calling him Ludora, because to her he was Ludora, no matter what name this life had given him. The king laughed at that. His name was Ludora again, was it? As long as she loved someone else, no wonder she gave him the cold shoulder. Velgrynd found the jealousy cute. He had a first-rate woman right in front of him, he grumbled, and it felt like being trapped in eternal limbo. The man who had gone from tribal chief to the first king of Arcia never became Velgrynd's lover, despite treating her as a goddess. Velgrynd was fine with that. Her role was to watch over him. She would wait for lovers to have children, for bloodlines to continue, and for one of them to carry a piece of Ludora's soul. That was how she lived. An age of development became an age of prosperity. Happy days passed too quickly. The young man grew old, lost much of his strength, and soon reached the point where he was simply waiting for death. He told Velgrynd that he had led a happy life. She had called him her husband, and he asked whether he had fulfilled the role well enough. Velgrynd answered that he had and that she had been happy. The old king was relieved. He blessed her, and those became his final words. His silent voice handed over his soul to Velgrynd. She had the fragment she wanted, but it was only a tiny piece. Her journey had barely begun, and so she leapt again. The kingdom he left behind continued to absorb the nations around it, growing into an empire. Later generations wrote records, and records became mythology. In the lands of the Holy Arcian Empire ruled by the young man's descendants, Velgrynd, the fire-wielding creator goddess, was worshipped for years and years to come. Velgrynd repeated that cycle of encounters and partings. Through it, she came to understand that Veldanava had created more than one world. Many more, in fact. A single world was self-enclosed. There were no parallel duplicates of the same world stacked inside one timeline. There were other worlds, however, each residing in its own alternate dimension. Velgrynd already knew that much from the other worlders she had met, but she had never imagined the sheer number of these worlds or how diverse they could be. Some ran on laws unlike anything she knew. Some were unbound by the rules of karma. Some were familiar, full of magic and sword fighting. Others had almost no magicules at all, locked away from spells and driven instead by something called science. In rarer worlds, humans transformed themselves into machines. Some realms were small enough for an unleashed true dragon to erase them from existence. Others were wastelands fought over endlessly by angels and demons with the strength of awakened demon lords. Velgrynd crossed all of them, not by absolute free choice, but by following the path shown to her. They existed at different levels of civilization, or sometimes none at all, and she could not always tell what dimension she had entered or what timeline she was touching. Because no duplicate parallel worlds overlapped in the same universe, there were never two of the same existence inside one timeline. Returning was not as simple as remembering a place. In a dimension and timeline where she currently existed, she could produce accurate space-time coordinates for herself. Across dimensions, even Cthugha and Dimensional Leap could not provide perfect coordinate selection. That meant her knowledge became something stranger. The memories of many Ludoras, in many worlds, gathered as she found them. One Ludora was a fleet commander serving a galactic empire. One was the vizier of a small kingdom in a magic-oriented world. One was a globe-trotting swindler in a realm without magic. One was a poor scientist in a civilized world. Their lives, faces, hair, and bloodlines varied wildly. To Velgrynd, all of them were Ludora. Often, she was called to a soul fragment bearer at the moment that person faced grave danger. Only when death stared them in the face would the soul emit the shine she needed. She was not always on time. Sometimes they died as children. Those were sad sights, but Velgrynd accepted them as fate. If nothing else, such tragedies let her gather the fragment more quickly, and she saw no need to weep over what she could not change. Even so, she never tried to accelerate time with her power. Watching over all those disparate Ludoras was how she found happiness. The number of soul fragments grew little by little, and the beautiful whole slowly returned. By instinct, Velgrynd could sense that only a few remained. Perhaps the next one would be the last. Perhaps the one after that. So she continued to leap, going wherever the call led her. After one such voyage, Velgrynd appeared in an ornate chamber. This was an empire. Silk robes seemed to be the standard dress of the era, in deep blue shades that suited her well. Before her lay an elderly emperor on a large, magnificent bed. Age had stolen much of his stamina, but when a strange woman appeared in his bedchamber, he did not scream. That much courage remained intact. The emperor asked who she was. Velgrynd paid little mind to his alarm. An old man again, was it? That look brought back memories of the tribal chief. To her, old age was only another human condition, one shape among many. She reached toward the old man's cheek and brought her lips close to his ear. She told him her name was Velgrynd and asked for his. The emperor did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked if she did not fear him and whether her power was divinity. A sword had been thrust against Velgrynd's throat. She blocked it with one delicate finger and did not even move her eyes. No blood was drawn. The demon-destroying strike produced nothing. The attacker was not the Emperor, but one of his guardians, Gensei Araki, the Imperial Guardian charged with protecting the land from man-eating fiends and evil spirits. He wielded a blade meant to dispel evil and was the greatest swordsman of the present age, master of the Oboro Shinmei-ryu. Still in his early 30s, he had been named Guardian of the Emperor despite his youth. Not even Gensei's blade could wound Velgrynd. Gensei told Saburo Minamoto to guard his majesty. Minamoto obeyed at once. He was a talented man in his early 20s, third-ranked among Gensei's pupils, and like Gensei, he guarded the Emperor from the shadows. Velgrynd told them they did not need to be so wary. They might both be masters of their techniques, but to her their resistance was more cute than threatening. Gensei knew he could not match her, but he still meant to buy time. Velgrynd shrugged. Asking for trust was too much, perhaps, but she only wanted them to keep the Emperor there for her. She did not care if she was maligned. What she would not tolerate was increasing the Emperor's burden. From what she could tell, His Majesty had only a short time left. She could not bear the thought of her arrival extinguishing that last ember. At the very least, she wanted to care for him in his final moments and bring him tranquility. Minamoto suffered the most from the situation. A single glance from Velgrynd froze him where he stood. That gaze made him realize the insurmountable gap in their ability. No, it went beyond ability. This was something inscrutable, a being that made the demons and mystic beasts they had fought look like children. If Gensei's respected blade had failed, Velgrynd was clearly no one to trifle with. Still, Minamoto had a duty. Frustrated by his helplessness, he summoned what metal he could and asked whether she was one of the Yohma leaders striding forth herself to end the squabbling. Velgrynd understood the purpose behind the question. He was talking to hide cold sweat, hoping to uncover the identity of this assailant. She asked whether they called such creatures Yohma in this world. They existed here too? You really did find them lurking everywhere. Minamoto demanded to know whether she was saying she was not one. She was not, she answered. Besides, she could not be sure their Yohma were the same creatures she knew. Velgrynd could analyze and speak the language of any world almost instantly. This was not a skill so much as a function of her body, reading the thoughts moving among that world's people. But similar concepts could be confused for each other, so she had to avoid careless assumptions. The word Yohma translated in her mind to mystic. The mystics she knew were led by Feldway, the Mystic Lord, and belonged to the aggressors, races that existed in all dimensions. Velgrynd had clashed with them many times during her journey. The thought of meeting them again made her groan, though she still hoped these Yohma were something else. The Emperor answered that Yohma were Yohma. Not even he knew what they truly were. By then, Gensei had tried to change strategy. While Minamoto held Velgrynd's attention, he would evacuate the Emperor. Their roles switched without a word, showing deep trust. The attempt was doomed, but it was still worth making. The Emperor himself stopped it. Gensei was startled, but the Emperor said it was fine. Somehow, this person filled him with nostalgia. Besides, he was already in the safest location in the capital, surrounded by layers of defense. If she had bypassed all of that to arrive in his bedchamber, where could he possibly run? He was right. The conquering Empire of Japan was at war with a vast enemy, and the palace was on high alert. Anyone who penetrated this far past its defenses had already proven the Empire's security defeated. More importantly, the Emperor could not bring himself to fear Velgrynd. She reminded him of old times, and those memories felt like relief. So he chose to trust her. They would speak, and if possible, he would recruit her as an ally. They remained in the bedchamber, sharing tea and light snacks brought by attendants. Velgrynd introduced herself again. Gensei gave his full name and role. Saburo Minamoto introduced himself as captain of the Imperial Palace Swordsman Guard. Velgrynd politely acknowledged them, then immediately turned her attention back to the man she loved and asked for his name, still calling him Ludora. The Emperor remarked that he had never expected such a beauty to attend him in his advanced age. He did not dislike it, but could not help wishing he were a little younger. Velgrynd teased him for flattering her. What a rare experience, Ludora. The Emperor chuckled. He had not meant it as flattery. His name, he said, was Oharu. He thought he was better known than that in this realm, but perhaps old age had made him conceited. His name was renowned. as was his reputation as a wise ruler. Oharu was his real non-regal name, not one normally used in common circles and not even used casually by many of those close to him. Yet it was still known and respected by every citizen. To Velgrynd, however, he was Ludora. Even if calling the Emperor Oharu to his face was not taboo, she had no intention of doing so. She laughed and told him he would have no way of knowing. She had only come to this world at the first moment she met him here. The man she knew was named Ludora, and she would continue calling him that. It was an astonishingly rude way to address royalty. One smile from the Emperor made it permitted. Oharu allowed it. A small price, he said, if it earned him the favor of this goddess. But he could not allow her to stand by his side in public. Velgrynd asked why not. Oharu explained that he had his position to uphold. If someone attending him called him a name no one had ever heard before, it would cause unnecessary anxiety among his retainers. If Velgrynd displayed her power openly across the empire, chaos would follow. Oharu's request was really a way to keep his court manageable. Velgrynd understood, and for now she did not press her personal will. More important was learning what crisis Ludora faced. She asked how she should present herself in public, and what exactly was happening in this place. Velgrynd never beat around the bush. If Ludora was in danger, she was ready to help. Watching that transcendental being behave so earnestly around the Emperor gave both bodyguards headaches. Gensei thought it wiser to seek her assistance than to anger her. Minamoto, on the other hand, was already drowning in court procedure. She seemed reverent toward His Majesty, yes. But what about the Empress and Imperial Prince? How would they explain this woman? In some worlds, a king or emperor keeping mistresses would cause no disturbance, but not here. The Emperor's spouse came from the right pedigree, and any child became part of the royal line. The women around the Emperor occupied strict ranks, with an impenetrable wall between Empress and concubines. Presenting Velgrynd as a concubine seemed like the only option, and even that raised terrifying questions. Would she be satisfied with that? If she demanded to be Empress, who could stop her? Minamoto was a worrier, but he was not wrong to worry. His duty covered the safety of the entire court, not just the Emperor's body. Still, Velgrynd's question needed an answer. Minamoto began with the Empire's current situation. The conquering Empire of Japan was under extreme tension. Outside its borders, the world had fallen into chaos. 5 great powers dominated the map. Japan lay in the east. To the south stood the United States of Azaria. To the north, the Greater Rossium Dynasty. To the west, the Holy Arcian Empire. In the center, the Republic of Chinese Fiefdoms. For decades, they had competed ruthlessly, then settled into a tense equilibrium. Trade and economic relationships matured. War seemed ready to fade. But old grievances never vanished, and profit for one nation meant loss for another. 4 years earlier, the Republic of Chinese Fiefdoms suffered a massive drought. Water shortages led to starvation and disease. Dissidents rose. The Republic's government redirected that unrest outward, and the world began to burn. The Chinese targeted a southern grain region and voted to invade the United States of Azaria. Greater Rossium saw the movement and invaded the Chinese mainland, seeking farmland and a warm water port. Japan, dependent on the Chinese fiefdoms for food, deployed its military under the name of a humanitarian mission, hoping to end the conflict quickly. Instead, Rossium was enraged and Japan's relationship with Azaria collapsed. The Holy Arcian Empire remained quiet at first, but famine struck there as well. Then an oil storage facility burned, destroying 3 years' worth of fuel, with evidence pointing to Rossium saboteurs. Anti-Rossium fury spread, and Arcia joined the war. One man suspected that all of this was too convenient. Pulcinella the Mad Priest, leader of the Holy Spiritualist Church. Spiritualism was one of the world's 3 major religions, alongside Buddhism and the Free Path. Pulcinella spoke of a vision showing a great evil presence behind the scenes. His churches investigated and allegedly traced one of the Yohma that had helped set the world ablaze. By then it was too late. Velgrynd summed it up. This Yohma had manipulated greed and old grudges until they became a world war. Minamoto agreed. Looking back with a clear head, the chain of events was far too convenient. But once the people's anger was lit, dousing it was nearly impossible. Gensei added that the spiritualist church was not alone. Within a year, world leaders had noticed the anomaly, but extremists and the militaries responded to sabotage with action, and by the time anyone understood the trap, there was no way left to stop the war. Deployed forces were nearly outside central control. Then came a disastrous sea battle. A massive fleet from the United States of Arcia clashed with the conquering empire's proud Imperial Navy in the Great South Sea. Reconnaissance suggested both sides were evenly matched, but when battle began, the Arcian force was 3 times larger than expected. It was the work of the Chinese fleet. They had betrayed Japan, though not even the Chinese commanders seemed aware of the betrayal. Japan learned the truth too late, and its navy was devastated. Still, that defeat was not entirely useless. Gensei revealed that one of his students had risked his life to obtain vital intelligence. A man named Kondo staged a brave suicide attack on the enemy fleet. Just before his death, he sent a telepathic message reporting that the enemy commanders had been taken over by an unusually fierce Yohma. Arcian Supreme Southern Fleet Commander David Regan and Chinese Eastern Fleet Commander Li Jinlong had both used strange mystical powers to interfere with Kondo. Realizing there was no hope of victory, Kondo kept gathering intelligence until the very end. Then contact was lost. Gensei feared Kondo had died in vain. Velgrynd understood immediately. The Kondo in this world had to be Lieutenant Tatsuya Kondo, the man she knew well. Perhaps Kondo had cared so deeply for Ludora because Ludora reminded him of the emperor he had once served. Perhaps he had instinctively understood that Ludora and Oharu shared the same soul. For the first time, Velgrynd felt affinity for Kondo. She could firmly believe his loyalty had been real. Now she wondered not only about Ludora's regrets, but Kondo's as well. Kondo had seemed frustrated that he could not protect his home country. That was why he had served Ludora so fiercely, stopping at nothing so he would not repeat that failure. Was there anything Velgrynd could do for him now, even this late? There was only one answer. She would atone for his regrets. With her mind made up, Velgrynd listened more seriously. The Yohma's power to possess people had been reported to the world's leaders. But the leaders were not on the front lines. They had no reliable way to determine who had been taken over. Publicizing the findings would cause panic. Soldiers would wonder whether their commanders were Yohma. Chains of command would collapse, and witch hunts might break out at home. So investigations continued in secret. They learned that these Yohma were not like ordinary Mononoke ghouls. They behaved in organized groups and clearly sought conquest from behind the scenes. The Empire measured mystical creatures with the Kaikyu, an apparition scale. From top to bottom, the ranks were Shinbutsu, gods and Buddhas, Kiryu, demon dragons, Tenyo, heavenly ghouls, high yokai, mid yokai, and low yokai. The weakest Yohma foot soldiers ranked at the high end of this scale, at Tenyo. Their leaders, including Regan and Lee, were estimated at Kiryu or higher. Gensei believed that estimate because Kondo had been one of the greatest fighters in the land of the rising sun. Kondo had mastered Battle Will, the ultimate move of Oboro Shinmei-ryu, giving him Kiryu-level fighting ability. If even that had not won, the enemy's strength was not to be underestimated. Velgrynd said that Kondo had certainly been of that caliber. Oharu and Minamoto both reacted. Did she know Tatsuya? Velgrynd told him that she did, still calling him Ludora. Kondo had served him in her world as well. There, too, Kondo fought for him and died a noble death. The Emperor fell silent, unsure what to say. Losing such a faithful servant filled him with disappointment. Minamoto stood blankly, unable to accept that Kondo was gone. Part of him had hoped Kondo might still be alive, the final option against the Yohma. Gensei remained outwardly calm, but even he had to bury the sadness of losing that last hope. Everyone believed Velgrynd. It was strange, but as she told them of Kondo's final moments, they could sense she was not lying. Velgrynd used the conversation to measure the enemy. If they could defeat Kondo before he came to her own world, perhaps this world's Tenyo rank was not very strong by her standards. She was confident these Yohma would pose no threat to a true dragon like her. But losing to Rimuru had taught her to be watchful, so she withheld final judgment until she had a scale. After the conference, Velgrynd had the general picture. Japan had no realistic chance of a miraculous comeback. The world's leaders knew the truth, but they could not halt the rampage of the people or the militaries acting in their name. She asked what the enemy was doing now. The enemy's unified fleet, fresh from destroying the Imperial Navy, had gone silent. Some Japanese ships should have survived, but all contact had been cut off. Normally, the defeated fleet would have surrendered and sent word home. Nothing had arrived. Gensei suspected the ships had been seized by Yohma. Oharu noted Kondo's phrasing, a takeover of their bodies. If the Yohma possessed sailors from the inside, survivors were unlikely. The Great South Sea offered no escape route. Other nations had been asked to reach out, but they had heard nothing. Japan's war power had likely been stolen. So Gensei and the others focused on defending the imperial capital. It would only buy time, and they knew that. The plan was to gather dependable personnel, learn the enemy's movements, then assemble the strongest force they could from around the world to defeat the enemy leader. Minamoto admitted the plan was unlikely to work. If Kondo had been alive and there were only one Kiryu-class enemy, perhaps he could have won. But now there were at least two, and Kondo could not even escape. If they brought together Minamoto, Gensei, and Masahiko Amari, then joined forces with heroes from the other nations, perhaps they could defeat the Yohma leaders. Masahiko Amari was another master swordsman, a rival to Kondo for the title of strongest. He was also an expert spellcaster and intelligence specialist, currently on a secret mission, and Japan was not the only country with hidden talent. Pulcinella the Mad Priest and Xianhua the Holy Fist were known as great powers in their own right. It would take heroes like those from across the world to overcome the crisis. Failure meant every nation would fall. Oharu knew the idea was close to fantasy. Worse, they did not know whether there were only two enemy leaders. If there were more, Gensei said bitterly, the situation was grim. To defeat one Kiryu-level monster, he would want at least twice as many equal or superior fighters. Without knowing the enemy's true numbers, even assembling heroes became a gamble. Japan's first duty was keeping its emperor and key figures safe. Velgrynd watched them struggle, then offered an irresistible hand. They had many problems, she said, but she would help. First, she wanted Gensei to show her the extent of his power. Gensei was caught off guard. Velgrynd explained that strategy was impossible if she did not understand the enemy. Since he was Kondo's teacher, he should be at least as good as Kondo. She had only arrived in this world moments ago and did not know what counted as strong here. Gensei would be her yardstick. Gensei understood. He would outclass Kondo in terms of ability, he said. He knew special moves never shown publicly, and finishers passed down only among the originator and pupils of his style. But Kondo's convictions had been unwavering, his drive to win extraordinary. In a serious bout, luck would have played a major role. In other words, they were roughly equal. Small differences did not matter to Velgrynd. She needed a scale, so she decided to test him immediately. They moved to a practice ground. Gensei had Minamoto leave since he could not show his student the most secret techniques. The only outsider present was the Emperor. Velgrynd stood unarmed in her silk robes. Gensei held his beloved blade, but concern crossed his mind. Her clothing was not suited to battle and offered no protection. The strongest moves of his style could kill instantly if he committed fully. He did not expect to defeat her, but he wondered whether he might injure her. So he asked whether she truly wanted him to use a real sword. The best techniques of his style might perhaps be a threat. Velgrynd recognized the concern and chose to ease it. She told him his kindness was admirable, but there was no need to worry. The Uchi katana was a fine antique, but it would not work on her. He should attack with everything he had. In truth, Gensei's blade was not even unique class. In a world with so few magicules, swords could not evolve the way they might elsewhere. Gensei accepted the invitation. He gathered all his explosive fighting energy and unleashed the mightiest skill of Oboro Shinmei-ryu multi-layered Blossom Flash. Unfortunately, nothing blossomed. The exquisitely honed attack was stopped by one of Velgrynd's fingertips. His blade whipped through the air so quickly that it seemed to split into many weapons too fast for ordinary sight. To Velgrynd, it was simply too slow. She told him that if this was his full effort, she had seen enough. Gensei conceded. Calling it a difference in power felt inadequate. It was like comparing heaven and earth, or perhaps something beyond even that. The gap between them was obvious to everyone. It was a grave disappointment for Gensei, but Velgrynd had learned what she wanted. Gensei's Hakusen was a secret art passed only through the main branch of his sword style and never taught to Kondo. It was almost certainly the pinnacle of this world's force. In raw power, Hakusen let its user surpass Kiryu and reach Shinbutsu rank. Gensei asked whether Velgrynd was truly a god. She answered that her brother had created her world, but no, she was not. Gensei noted that here they could certainly call that a god. Velgrynd admitted that the term god differed by time and place. They could think of her however they liked, but there were forces in existence that could even destroy her. She remembered a certain happy-go-lucky slime. Losing to him still annoyed her, but she was no longer convinced a rematch would end better. She could not think of Rimuru as a god either. Perhaps gods were simply not the right way to think about such things. That question could wait. What mattered now was the Yohma. Gensei thanked her for facing him. The battle had painfully shown him how immature and insignificant he was, and he would use the experience to improve. Velgrynd paid little attention to his humility. A theory was forming. Gensei and Kondo were about equal in strength, but that strength was far below the Kondo she had known. When humans in physical space crossed between worlds, most died from exposure to concentrated magicules. In rare cases, those magicules broke down and reconstructed their bodies, making them tougher and more resilient. She had forgotten how weak the magicule count was in this world. It had to be difficult to cast spells, and magical body enhancement could not have developed far. If Gensei produced that much force almost entirely through natural strength, he deserved praise. The blow she felt on her fingertip would have counted as an A-ranked feat back in her homeworld. Impressive considering the weapon was rare level at best. That helped her picture the enemy. Tenyo were likely somewhere between B and A-. Kiryu might reach over A territory. If so, her theory that the Yohma were mystics was probably correct. Mystics were demi-spiritual aggressor species. In physical space, they could function only briefly without incarnating in physical bodies. In a world as poor in magicules as this one, possessing someone else's body was necessary. Otherwise, they would waste too much energy. But once inside a body, they could not release their full latent power without tearing that body apart. That weakened them terribly. If they were merely trying to kill, perhaps they would not care. But if their goal was invasion, they had reason to hold back. That explained why this world's Kondo had been a good match for them. If the mystics used their full force, nobody on this planet could defeat them. Velgrynd smiled, knowing someone like her had arrived. Even against Feldway, Lord of the Mystics, she was confident she could find a way to win, and there was little chance Feldway himself was involved. In fact, Velgrynd's prediction was correct. The invaders were a vanguard force of mystics under Kornu, one of the 3 mystic leaders. The Underworld gate that had manifested in this world was too small for Kornu himself to emerge. They were working to enlarge it, but the world still had a little time before full conquest. Velgrynd had not inferred all of that yet, but what she had was enough. Gensei, for all his composure, was depressed. His proudest sword skills had done nothing. Even his hidden technique had failed. He knew intellectually that Velgrynd was from another dimension, but his heart struggled to accept it. Velgrynd told him he should be proud. In a world with almost no magicules, he had attained remarkable strength. Few others here could have come close. If he could take in more magicules and upgrade his body, he might have reached saint level, perhaps even enlightened. Gensei called enlightened a faraway goal. Velgrynd disagreed. As thanks for his demonstration, she offered him a reward. If he was interested, she could reforge his Uchigatana with her power. Gensei was bewildered. Could she even do that? At this point, nothing should have surprised him, but the idea still did. Velgrynd was too lofty for him to understand. If she said she could do it, she probably could. The sword was a family treasure passed down from his ancestors. After a moment, Gensei decided he could trust Velgrynd with it. He bowed and passed over the blade. Velgrynd accepted it. Normally, she might have simply conjured an azure dragon sword, but that was not what this moment called for. She inspected the blade's internal structure, adjusted her approach, and began letting her magicules flow through it. This required care. She looked far more serious and focused than she had during the battle. Half an hour passed. The old swordsmith's skill and ingenuity, combined with Velgryn's precise magicules, produced a divine glow around the blade. Then she was finished. Weapon evolution normally required centuries or millennia. In that short time, Velgrynd had recrafted Gensei's sword into a god-class wonder. Gensei could barely understand what he was looking at. Velgrynd explained that the blade was now the best weapon it could be, probably more than any other blade in this world. She doubted he could fully use its features yet, but the sword now possessed its own consciousness. If it accepted him, it would lend him some of its strength. She chuckled, and her radiant smile captivated Gensei. Of course, she added, she could not say whether that acceptance would come for him or for his descendants. That evening, Oharu invited Velgrynd to dinner in his chamber, and she accepted eagerly. The palace attendants were carefully selected and well-trained. Not even Velgrynd's presence upset their movements as they prepared the meal. Minamoto guarded the door outside. Shinmei stood behind Oharu. Only the Emperor and his unannounced guests sat at the table. Oharu asked what Velgrynd planned to do. She answered that she would stay with him and protect him. He was happy to hear that, but asked whether he should take it to mean she was an ally of the Empire. Velgrynd said yes, smiling. Merely sharing space with Ludora made her content. Oharu chuckled nervously, unsure how to handle that devotion. In that case, he joked, could she eliminate all conflict from the world and put his mind at ease for good? He meant it as a joke. Velgrynd smiled back. If he wished it, she said, she would offer him the entire world as a present. She would gladly do away with whatever countries he preferred not to have around and silence anyone who dared complain. But before that, they really did need to exterminate those pesky little Yohma. Her smile was innocent. No one in the room knew how to respond. The attendant setting up dinner almost spilled soup across the tablecloth. Everyone instinctively understood that Velgrynd meant every word, meaning it and actually being capable of it were different things, of course. If anyone else had said this, it would have sounded like delirious nonsense. But something about Velgrynd made dismissal impossible. Gensei knew this was not a joke. It was realistically possible. Oharu knew it too. The Emperor laughed. He had not laughed like that in ages. To tell a joke that even his attendants took seriously, he said she had truly outdone herself. He enjoyed how dauntless she sounded and appreciated the thought. For the moment, he danced around the topic to avoid alarming his staff further. By now, Velgrynd's superhuman nature was obvious, and dinner made it clearer. She was not only physically strong, her thought process itself was fearsome. Only then did Oharu fully realize she would do anything for him. If he ordered her to annihilate another country, she would very likely do it. Good and evil were trifles to her. What mattered was Oharu's will. That made him feel more lost than at any previous point in his life. Oharu had been born first heir to the throne, never lacking anything. He had never had freedom either. From childhood, he had been taught that surrendering freedom was the obligation of a future ruler. He could obtain anything he needed, but he had to give up what he truly wanted. Romance was a fantasy. His marriage to the daughter of a supporting prince had been almost contractual, and he had no right to refuse. Oharu was intelligent enough to realize in his teens that the only permanent thing in life is change. Everything is fleeting, the world like a mirage. Pursuing dreams with everything you have can be beautiful, because everything leaves you anyway. Choosing not to resist fate, flowing along and tasting the small joys of daily life, can be just as beautiful. Oharu chose the latter. Even an emperor with everything could not have the luxury of doing what he wanted. That was why Velgrynd surprised him so deeply. She had limitless freedom. Nothing and no one held her down. Yet she swore to serve no one but Oharu. She was a strange woman, or perhaps a goddess. Even if he was only a substitute for Ludora, that honest goodwill made him self-conscious. Oharu pondered that feeling while enjoying the most relaxing dinner he had had in a long time. The next morning, a conference was held in the Imperial headquarters. The main question was how to deal with Velgrynd. Oharu had already forbidden her from behaving as his lover in public. If so, they first had to explain her position to everyone else. Then there was the matter of clothing. She could not dress like a foreigner. She needed an outfit suited to whatever social role they gave her. Attendants brought in clothing. Gensei and Minamoto offered opinions while Oharu considered how to classify her. Minamoto suggested making her another Imperial attendant, but Gensei cut him off. Attendants could not participate in conferences. Oharu wondered whether calling her a guard would be difficult. Gensei admitted they had considered it, but Velgrind's appearance drew too much attention. She looked plainly foreign. People might assume she was a spy. Velgrind's features had a Scandinavian kind of beauty, which made her stand out sharply in this court. If she were introduced to the guards or espionage corps, they would inevitably ask why a foreigner had been given such a lofty post. At the same time, there was no chance she would accept being shut away from every official, and wasting her fighting power when she was willing to help would be foolish. While they searched for an answer, Velgrynd solved the immediate problem herself. She did not like doing it and did not particularly want to do it now, but she would change her outward appearance for them. The next moment, her hair darkened, as did her eyes. Her skin took on a warmer shade, almost yellow with a hint of red. Minamoto was stunned. Gensei had already assumed she could manage at least that much. Oharu, relieved, said there had been nothing to worry about. A slight shift in pigment changed her overall impression dramatically. She was still not exactly purely Japanese, but close enough that the remaining difference could be explained. She was given the same uniform as Genji and officially positioned so she could attend the necessary meetings. The Emperor, it should be noted, had 3 organizations charged with guarding him. The first was the Imperial Palace Swordsman Guard, the only force permitted to carry weapons inside the palace. Even there, only Minamoto, their captain, could personally enter the Emperor's chambers. The second was the Imperial Palace Spellcaster Guard, which protected the Emperor from hostile spell-driven attacks. Their main work was maintaining a spiritual protective barrier at all times. In individual combat, they were inferior to the swordsmen. Like their sister force, only their captain could personally attend the Emperor. But that captain was currently defending the capital and had not been seen in days. Finally, there was the Imperial Patrol, composed of court guardians who usually operated individually. Gensei was one of them, a highly public figure, but not all patrol members were listed in the official annals. Some worked in darkness to dispel evil. Many had supernatural powers. Others operated separately from the Imperial Chamber, serving as body doubles for Oharu. The Imperial Patrol gathered people who protected the Emperor in many different ways, and it was generally understood that not all of them had public profiles. That made the patrol the best fit for Velgrynd. Oharu formally named her a member of the Imperial Patrol. With her current appearance, he said, they likely would not need to explain much to everyone else. Velgrynd accepted gladly. In her new military uniform, she promised to act strictly as his servant around others. A sense of doom spread among the Emperor's advisors, but none of them had a better idea. Even if some new problem arose, they reasoned as preparations began, it would be trivial compared with the Yohma invaders already threatening the world.
Route confirmed. The next episode and full playlist are ready.
Then don't stop here. Keep watching in story order and subscribe before the next part drops.